Right, so thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are. We're now... Oh, shut up! Sorry about that. That was an ambulance. We're at Aldgate Station. That's Aldgate mainline, not mainline station, the underground station, not Aldgate East, is what I'm saying. Hang on, let me just switch over so you can see the idea of where we are. So that is Aldgate. Further down that road, you've got the ambulance that was making all that racket. And what I'm talking about today is the murder of Catherine Eddowes that took place at, we think, about 1:35, 1:40 in the early morning of Saturday the 30th of September 1888. That was the second murder that evening. The first one was of a lady called Liz Stride, and she was murdered at 1 o'clock in the morning in a place called Dutfield's Yard in Berners Street, which is about half a mile distant from here in that direction. As I say, I've already covered, please go forward. I've already covered that murder. I won't go over it again. Just to say that Jack the Ripper, having committed that murder, didn't have to run in order to get here. He could walk quite casually, not do anything to attract his attention, attract the attention of the police or anybody else, to make his way to the Church of St. Botolph, which is just round the corner. So I'll go there now, but before I do that, I'll just point out in that direction. You might not be able to see it. There is a bus stop D, and that really marks the site where Catherine Eddowes was picked up by the police. She was drunk and lying in the gutter, having made quite a spectacle of herself throughout the evening. She eventually collapsed into the gutter. The police picked her up and shunted her straight off to Bishopsgate Police Station to sober up for the evening. Anyway, that was Bishopsgate Police Station, is down by Liverpool Street Underground Station. Anyway, what we'll do is now move from here and we'll go forward, and I'll be talking about the murder of Catherine Eddowes, who was the second murder of the double event, and also the fourth murder in the canonical 5, although we don't really know that there were 5, and there were probably many more other than that. But anyway, that you've seen this before. This is the Church of St. Botolph with its distinctive spire, and what I propose to do is just settle down in Aldgate Square, make my way round here through all this roadworks that are going on at the present moment. Okay, so this is the Church of St. Botolph, Aldgate, and ahead of us we have Aldgate Square. Aldgate Square is very new, actually. It's only been here for a few years. I think they put it up here sometime, or laid it out, I should say, sometime before the COVID crisis that became such a nuisance in 2020. So I reckon, yes, it's about 2019, as I recall. Anyway, it's a very pleasant little square, and you could actually sit down and just relax. And a little way ahead of you, you've got a little coffee shop, which is rather nice. But at any rate, this gives me an opportunity to sit down and talk a little bit about Catherine Eddowes. She was 46. I tell you what, I'll go around and do it the other way around so you can get a view of the church. You don't have to just look at me all the time. So if I do it this way, you can actually see the church in the background. There we are. That's ideal. There we go. There we go. Okay, so Catherine Eddowes, she was 46 when she was murdered. Catherine Eddowes was 5 feet tall. She had dark auburn hair, and hazel eyes. And generally speaking, she used to make a living by hawking, as to say, selling odd items here and there. Sometime before this, she'd actually was a hawker of chapbooks. A chapbook being, we'd understand it now as an e-book. It was just a little tract on some matter of popular interest. And she used to compose these, so she was considered to be something of a scholar. She was described by her friends as being intelligent and scholarly. And others said of her that she was a very jolly woman, always singing. Anyway, Catherine Eddowes was born in the town of Wolverhampton. That's some 130 miles to the northwest of London. It's not so very far from the city of Birmingham. And her father was a tinsmith, or say a tin plate worker. And Catherine belonged to a family of 11 children. And when she was 2 years old, her parents came down to London. They walked all the way from Wolverhampton, following the course of the Grand Union Canal till they came down to London, and then they settled in that district we call Bermondsey, which is just due south of the River Thames, due south of Tower Bridge. And she was born and brought up in Bermondsey, so she was a true Londoner really, although she'd been born in Wolverhampton. And she was educated at a local school, so she had she could read and write, which is quite a thing in those days. But her parents died before she was 15 years old, and that left her wondering what to do. So she had to walk all the way back to Wolverhampton and spent some time under the care of her aunt. And then she ran away from her aunt. Apparently they didn't get on. And she went to Birmingham, where she met up with a man called Tom Conway. Now, he was an Irish soldier, and it was Tom Conway by whom she had 3 children. We don't know whether she was married. She thought she was, but there's no evidence of that. And they used to make their living, as I say, by selling these chapbooks. Now, they got on very well together. The only problem was that Tom Conway was a strict teetotaler, and Catherine rather liked to drink alcohol, so that created a strain on the relationship, and in the due course of time they parted company. The relationship had fallen apart completely by 1880. She'd come down to London. She got away from Tom Conway, came down to London, and she struck up a relationship with a man called John Kelly, who was a market porter. He used to work in places like Spitalfields. What she and John Kelly used to do at harvest time is that they'd go to work in the fields of Kent. That's what a lot of poor people used to do in those days. They would leave London sometime in September. They'd go and work in the fields in Kent to make a bit of money for themselves, and then come back to London much richer than they had been. But the problem with the summer of 1888 is that it was actually the worst possible summer they could have had for that century. There had been frost in July, and so there was no work and there was no money, and so what they had to do was simply come all the way back. What I'm going to do now is just take us down here. On the morning they returned to London towards the end of September. They eventually found, because they were penniless, they had to go and John Kelly had to pawn his boots, take them to a pawnbroker to see what he would get for them. What he got was ½ a crown. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the old British way of counting money, that is 30 pence, 30 old pence. There were 8 half crowns in a pound. So anyway, 30 pence. What John Kelly did was divide it between himself and Catherine Eddowes. So she took her 1 3d, and for what we know, they decide what they do is then go their separate ways and arrange to meet up the following day, which would have been Sunday the 30th. And so Catherine took her 1 and 3pence that evening and spent it all on drink. And as I said, she was seen, we don't know quite exactly what she'd spent during the day, but at 8 o'clock in the evening, she was picked up by the police and hauled off to the local police station. Now, Catherine Eddowes, she was in the police station. She was drunk, and then she started to sober up around about 12:30, and once she'd sobered up, she started to insist that she should be released. And she made such a nuisance of herself in the police station, eventually they were glad to let her out at 1 o'clock. She said that she was living in Fashion Street. She gave an address in Fashion Street. She wasn't. She was living not so far away in Flower and Dean Street at the time. That was a more or less permanent address. But anyway, she didn't go anywhere near Fashion Street. She simply got out of the police station and made her way all the way up this street here, back to the church in order to get another client, in order to make the money that she needed, to get some drink. Now, this area, the UK College of Business and Computing, this was more or less, or possibly Duke's House, more or less the site of the Imperial Club. Now, there were 3 members of that club, and their names were Joseph Lavender and Harry Harris and Joseph Hyam Levy. And they had spent the whole evening in the club. They were actually delayed their departure because it had been raining quite heavily that morning, but they eventually chanced it at 1:30 in the morning and then headed out of the club towards Aldgate. They'd have gone in this direction. And as they made their way up here along the street, what they were going to do is turn round and head off to the left. But before doing that, over on the right hand side, it was Joseph Lavender who most noticed them. There was a lady whom they later identified as being Catherine Eddowes, and she was talking to a younger man. And this would be in what, 11:30, 11:35. I'm going to cross here. There's no lights, but nevertheless I'm going to cross. He was of those 3, he was the man who got the best view, and the others really didn't want to get too involved. They realised what was going on and wanted to get away from it as quickly as possible. But what happened then is that Catherine Eddowes, they all went their ways, but Catherine Eddowes, she got her man and she took him down a Now this passage here, which they call St James's Passage, is really quite broad. It must be about 20 feet. In those days, I don't think it could have been more than 5 feet at the very most. But she brought her new client down here into what used to be Mitre Square. Now today it's here, you've got a little coffee shop. Actually, there's more than coffee. They sell alcohol here, which is rather nice. And here, this is the place which the Corporation of London have all laid out. They did this in 2017, as I recall, for the benefit of people who work here. And you've got this very, 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 very tall building all the way out there, you can see. So how all this is showing you just how London is changing. Anyway, Lavender described the man that Catherine Eddowes was talking to as being about 30 years old. He was just somewhat taller than Catherine. He was wearing a dark jacket and a peaked cloth cap, and he also had a red handkerchief round his neck, and he had a moustache. Now that sort of description is not really very helpful, because it could fit hundreds if not thousands of men around London, but at least it's better than nothing, and it's probably the best description that we have of Jack the Ripper. Anyway, what we do is come into Mitre Square, as it then was, and head down towards the scene of the murder. Let's just see how I can do that. There we go. And this is the way. So, Catherine Eddowes was murdered just around about here. And just what you had, Mitre Square, here, just directly in front of us, there were shops. There was just one small entrance into Mitre Square. And then you had that passage that led out into Duke's Place, and then leading off on the left-hand side you had another passage. Otherwise, I say, if you wanted to come into Mitre Square, you had to come in with a pony and cart from Mitre Street, which is here, just directly in front of us. Anyway, let me just talk a bit about the murder of Catherine Eddowes. All of this took place within a time frame of less than 10 minutes. At 1:30 that morning, PC, Police Constable Edward Watkins, had come into the square, as he usually did, every quarter of an hour or so, and just checked round. He had a lamp and he just shone it round, just to satisfy himself that everything was fine, and then he went on his way. At another 10 minutes after that, what we're talking about, about 1:40, we don't have the exact time, of course, but another police constable, James Harvey, came down the passage which I've been talking about, and I'll just point it out to you again. Hang on. There it is. Okay, as I say, that passage was only about 5 feet broad. And he didn't come into the square because his duties didn't take him into the square, so he just stopped short of coming into the square. And they say that if he'd had an electric torch, these things weren't invented until 1899, so it's hardly his fault that they didn't exist. If he'd had an electric torch and shone him directly in front of him, he'd be able to see the murder take place. Let me just, again, show you exactly what it is. Okay, so the murder's taking place here, and over here, ladies and gentlemen, we have what is now St James's Passage. It used to be called Church Passage, very much narrower. Okay, so the murder took place again, we think, round about those 1:35, 1:40. This is just a very short time frame for the murder to take place. Now, Jack the Ripper had perfected his technique, and it was his technique to allow his victim to take him to a quiet spot, and then at the psychologically correct moment he could put his hands around her throat immediately like that, you see, and then press very, very hard so that eventually it would block off the flow of blood to the brain, and she'd lose consciousness and her body would then fall down on the ground. It was then that he took out his knife. His knife would be about 6 or 8 inches long, with a very sharp point, and then he cut the throat. And having done that, he then started lifting up the skirt and cutting into the abdomen, pulling out the various internal organs, spreading them around the corpse. And then the whole object of this exercise was to create a shock and horror in the next, which of course it did, the next person who stumbled onto the scene. He then made a very swift exit, cleaning his hands and his knife with a piece of the apron that he is able to cut away from Catherine Eddowes' body. Now, the body of Catherine Eddowes was discovered by Police Constable Watkins at 1:44. And when he saw it, he said it looked like cut up like a pig in a market was the expression. Catherine had been strangled, her throat had been cut, and various bits and pieces had been taken out of her body, including her left kidney. And Jack had taken deep cuts, savage cuts, so there were two sort of cuts on both cheeks in the shape of a letter A. The nose had been cut off, the earlobes, and the eyelids. It was really a very gruesome business. Anyway, there he was with this body lying on the ground. So he then ran off to, this is Edward Watkins, went off to find help from the night watchman at Keely and Tong's tea warehouse, which is where that large building is standing. And of course he was blowing his whistle all the time in order to get help. So eventually what happened was he did get the help, and then the police came along with doctors, and they managed to get the body out and clean up the site. What they do is be very anxious to make certain that there wasn't any blood around for gawpers to come around and have a look at. They were very clear. Now, they wouldn't do that these days. What they do today, they would block off the square, and each square inch would be examined very closely for clues, but they didn't understand that thing at the time. They just wanted to clear up the mess as quickly as possible so that any ordinary members of the public wouldn't really know what was going on. Okay, anyway, as for Jack, now, what he did, he had to make his escape. And the way he did that, he couldn't go down Mitre Street because there was a police officer. He couldn't go up St James's Passage because there was another police officer. So the only way he could go was through Mitre Passage, which is more or less the way I'm going now. Of course, they've changed all this. This is no longer the same place that it once was in Victorian times. But at least it'll give you some sort of impression of Jack the Ripper's escape route. Now, some years ago, there was a lot of talk about Catherine Eddowes, her shawl. Somebody claimed that they could actually had the shawl of Catherine Eddowes and they could examine it for DNA, and they thought it had the DNA of a man called Aaron Kosminski. And they reckoned if they could examine the shawl and then compare it with the DNA of some surviving members of Aaron Kosminski's family, they could ascertain for once and for all that Aaron Kosminski was the murderer of Catherine Eddowes and the other victims in this series of murders. But after they made extensive scientific tests on the shawl, they couldn't produce any conclusive evidence one way or the other. And after having spent a lot of time and money on this exercise, somebody thought it would be a good idea to go back to the police records. It's always a good idea to go back to police records and find out what was going on, because the police said that Catherine Eddowes wasn't wearing a shawl. So what can you say about that? That was a complete and utter waste of time. So the identity of Catherine Eddowes is still a mystery. Not Catherine Eddowes, of Jack the Ripper is still a mystery. And that shawl, which never existed, wasn't very much of a help. Now then, here I am, I'm back in Duke's Place, and directly ahead of me we have some bollards which mark out the line of the old Roman and medieval wall. So we're sitting just immediately inside what used to be the old wall of London, and this was really all the built-up area of medieval London. This was the way things were for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then we had the Great Fire of 1666, which destroyed 4/5 of the city and made 80,000 people homeless. So what a lot of people did after the Great Fire is they made temporary accommodation for themselves in the open fields, which were some way beyond the wall. And that's typically when the area started to be built up. That was in the late 1600s. And in those days they would be building houses typically for a family of 8 people. That would be mother, father, 4 children, 2 servants. That was the usual way of things. And of course, being in the 1600s, these houses didn't have electricity, they didn't have running water. But if you've got servants, well, a servant can go to the pump, and there were several of those around, the pump which will be able to get water, and then again, servants can make certain they look after the place, see that meals are served, that the place is warm and tidy, that's the most important thing, and clean. That was way back in the 1600s, and of course London changed a great deal over the following 200 years. For one thing, it expanded in all directions. More and more people were coming in, and they were arriving every day, and there was a tremendous pressure on housing in London, and so the houses which had originally occupied by families had been sold off, the families moved out and the servants moved out, and the houses were then taken over by speculative landlords who crammed in as many people as they possibly could into these buildings. And they were full of vermin and cockroaches. And what happened then, as I say, after the murders of Jack the Ripper, there was a special move to go in for a lot and lots of slum clearance, which of course is very, very necessary. Okay, so what I'm doing now, I'm taking the route, or at least what I believe to be the route that Jack the Ripper took, and I'm moving from here to a place called Goulston Street, which is where we have really the only piece of, properly speaking, the only piece of really hard evidence in the whole of the Jack the Ripper story. So I'm making my way from here towards Goulston Street, which is heading east. And that means that because I'm heading east, I am not going north, I'm not going south, and I'm not going west, and neither did Jack the Ripper. He went east. And that's where we're going this time, ladies and gentlemen. So, I reckon that what he did is that he made his way quietly, unobtrusively, away from Mitre Square. He'd have kept this piece of cloth used to wipe his knife, to wipe his hands, make certain that they were clean. And then of course he'd look for a place where he could throw the cloth away. Okay. Now, over this course of time, there were letters sent to the police. There were 1,000 letters every week sent to various individuals. And what I'm going to do here is show you one of them. You may not actually get a very good view. This is called the Dear Boss Letter. And it was sent to the officers of the Central News Agency. It's dated the 25th of September. They received it the following day, and then they passed it on to the police the day after that. And what the letter says is, it's all written in this red ink in copperplate handwriting. Dear boss, I keep hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about leather apron gave me real fits. I'm down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and I want to get to work again. And you're going to hear about me soon and my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it all went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha! The next job I do, I will clip the lady's ears off and send them to the police officers just for jolly. Wouldn't you? Keep this letter back until I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife is so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get the chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind giving the trade name. Now that, what's most interesting is that was the first occasion when the name of Jack the Ripper was used in these proceedings. And of course, after the police had received that letter, they got many other letters using that name. All of them were hoaxes, all of them wasted enormous amounts of time, but they all had to be followed up, which is a bit sad really. And so that was the famous Dear Boss letter, which was the first occasion of this use of the expression Jack the Ripper. And ever since then, we've talked about serial murders, we've always called them the Ripper. We talk about the Yorkshire Ripper and the Ipswich Ripper, and they also have, I believe, a Hollywood Ripper. Anyway, it was a hoax, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it was. It was just a prank, something to keep people amused. And the hoaxers, there were two of them actually. There was Tom Bulling and another one, Fred West, and they used to work for the Central News Agency. And I say that is the name. Jack the Ripper has stuck ever since. Now here we are in Middlesex Street, and Middlesex Street, apart from being the boundary of the City of London, this is the location for a street market called Petticoat Lane, which comes to life on a Sunday morning. This is the time to come down. This is one end. This is the end where you get all the bargains. Right up the other end, that will take you down to Bishopsgate and to Liverpool Street Underground Station, and also to Bishopsgate Police Station. This is the very street that the police shunted Catherine Eddowes all the way down this street, down to the police station. Anyway, we're not going this way. What we're going to do now is go into Galston Street, where I'm going to talk about the hard evidence that relates to the Jack the Ripper story. And Galston Street is just a little way ahead of us. Now, you'll see how much for yourself how much things have changed. There's nothing really Victorian about these buildings. Most of them are very, very modern. There is, however, a building which I'm going to show you in just a moment, which went up in 1886, and this was we're almost there, Wentworth Model Dwellings. And Wentworth Model Dwellings is just directly ahead of us. Here we are. This was affordable accommodation for the poor people of London at the time. And actually, they were going to knock it down some years ago, but because of its historic interest, they've retained it. And as I say, it used to be for poor people. What I think has happened in more recent years is it's been taken over by very, very rich people who work in the financial institutions of the city and like to have a place where they can actually walk to work. Now, okay, there's a street market here, which is actually they're in the process of dismantling it. But what I want to do now is take you to the frontage of a restaurant, a fish and chip restaurant called Happy Days, and you'll see my reason for doing that in just a moment. Okay, just head down here. And Happy Days is just down here. It's over on the right hand side. It's a rotisserie, so you can go and get some half a roast chicken if that's what you like. That's where they will serve you. What have they got there? 1 piece and chips, 6 quid. 2 pieces and chips, 7 quid. 3 pieces and chips, 8 quid. Half a chicken and chips, £8. Okay. Now, here, this, just to show you, is Happy Days restaurant. And I've eaten here, as I say, in the company of other Jack the Ripper tour guides, and spent long afternoons in there talking about the murders. And this, why I brought you down here is I want to show you this. Now this is one of the very few times I've actually seen, there's normally a roller down shutter and you won't see this, but they've pulled the shutter up. Now this used to be the old entrance to the building. And I told you about the murder of Catherine Eddowes, and I said that took place at 1:40. Jack the Ripper came past here, and what he did is he just threw aside the piece of cloth that he was wiping his knife on, wiping his hands on, and then made his way from here. Now, that's 1:40 the murder. About 2:50, another police officer, his name was Alfred Long, he came down here and he noticed 2 things. I say he noticed, first of all, the piece of cloth lying in the gutter, lying just out, well, just not in the gutter really, but just within the doorway. And then above the doorway, you can't really, I don't think you can see it from here, you might just, if you know what it is you're looking for. The Jews are not the men who will be blamed for nothing. This was chalked up on the wall, and Jews was misspelt. The question is, did Jack the Ripper write that? Well, we don't really know. We know that Jack the Ripper had cut away Catherine Eddowes' petticoat, or her apron, and what happened then was very simply that he then came round here. Let me get all my facts right. The question then goes: is was this remark, the Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing? Was this actually, if you translate that into modern English, it means the Jews will be held responsible for what's going on. That's really what it comes down to. And the argument goes that if you're Jack the Ripper, the last thing you want to do is delay your escape from the scene and then call attention to yourself by writing obscure words on the wall. However, Daniel Berkowitz, the son of Sam, and the Zodiac Killer and 1 or 2 other people used to enjoy taunting the police with mysterious letters and mysterious messages. So I'm afraid the argument about that just goes on and on without any resolution. Anyway, the upshot of all this was that at 4 o'clock that morning, the Chief of Police, Sir Charles Warren, came down here, and when he saw this writing on the wall, he ordered that it should be wiped out immediately. The last thing he wanted to have was an anti-Semitic riot on his hands. So he gave strict instructions that these words should be wiped out with a sponge and water, which in fact is what happened. And the argument has then continued about the question, did the Chief of Police, was he the man responsible for destroying what may have been a piece of valuable evidence? And well, he didn't think so, it was that important at the time, but Jack the Ripper researchers, being what they are, like to make as much of it as they possibly can. Now, I used to think, as I say, that coming down here, and I still think there's a good argument to suppose that once Jack the Ripper had come away from the scene, what he did was head round to the right into Wentworth Street, and Wentworth Street goes all the way up here into Commercial Street, and then it goes beyond Commercial Street down towards well, Old Montague Street and Brick Lane, and you've been there before when I've been talking about Martha Tabram. But anyway, there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. This is Galston Street, and it then blends into Brick Lane, or not Brick Lane, to Bell Lane. All these lanes, these were once country lanes. Can you imagine all those hundreds of years ago? So, here we are now. What I need to talk now about is another letter known as the Lusk Letter, and I will show you that in just a moment. So this letter, you've seen the other one. This letter here is called the Lusk Letter, and what it says is, "From hell, Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if only you wait a while longer." Okay, well, just to explain, George Lusk was the chairman of the local vigilance committee. A vigilance committee was a team of men who really organised themselves to protect the neighbourhood, make certain they could get any evidence they can and then pass it on to the police. And they used to petition the Home Office to supply a reward for the murderer. But anyway, George Lusk received this curious letter came with a kidney, or at least wrapped up in a parcel. When he undid the parcel, he found inside there was half a kidney. Now, at this time, he thought this was a joke in bad taste. But there were other people on that committee who said what you should do is take it to the London hospital, where there's a man there who's a kidney specialist, and he'll be able to examine it for you. So they did that. And they discovered that this kidney, they couldn't of course tell whether it came from an adult. It was certainly human, it came from an adult. They couldn't tell whether it was from a male or from a female, but they know it came from the left-hand side of the body. And the evidence was that this came from somebody who suffered from the condition known as Bright's disease, which is a disease of the kidney. Now, what's so interesting about that information is that Catherine Eddowes, our victim in Mitre Square, was missing her left kidney, and she was also suffering from this condition known as Bright's disease. So the argument goes, if you reconnect the kidney with Catherine Eddowes and then connect it again with this, show you again, this gives you, what you're looking at is the handwriting of the man who murdered Catherine Eddowes and all the other victims in this series of murders. And you may be able to make your own deductions looking at this as to this man's level of education. He makes a number of very clumsy spelling mistakes, although he can actually hold a pen in some manner. But this matter has been put through to what they call graphological analysis. And the graphologists point to what they call the descenders. I'll just point these out. The F's and the Y's, very long and lots and lots of pressure, which indicates somebody with a lot of anger, a lot of built up energy, stabbing into the paper. So this is one of the reasons why they think that this letter, all the other letters, they know to be hoaxes, and I suppose in a sense this may just be a hoax. It's not something we can say is 100% watertight, but of all the letters that were sent to the police, this is the one that is most likely to be authentic. Now what I'm going to do is just take us around from here and show you Bell Lane, and they're closing up the market at the present moment. Just have another last look at it. And looking down from Bell Lane, we'll be looking in the sort of general direction of the London Fruit and Wool Exchange, and what used to be the site of Dorset Street and the murder of Mary Kelly. And I'll talk all about that in the next video. So thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. Over and out.